the man against the inferno. Let us begin not in the halls of power, nor in the dry annals of history, but in the heart of the inferno itself, with a simple object, a red bandana. Its owner was a young man named Wells Crowther. On the morning of the 11th of September, 2001, he was 24 years old, an equities trader, working on the 104th floor of the South Tower of the World Trade Center. When the second plane struck, a vision of hell was unleashed upon the earth. In that maelstrom of smoke, fire, and terror, as thousands fled for their lives, Wells Crowther did something different. He tied a red bandana over his mouth and nose, not to aid his own escape, but to turn back into the flames to save others. In that instant, the well-suited financial prodigy of a decadent age was burned away, and what emerged was the man he had always been destined to be, the firefighter he had dreamed of becoming since he was a boy. This was not a choice, but a revelation of character. It was a reversion to a primal, American archetype that the age had sought to bury under layers of irony, cynicism, and material comfort. The story of Wells Crowther is not merely an anecdote of that terrible day. It is a parable. It establishes a moral baseline, a glimpse of the innate, pre-political goodness and strength of the American spirit, a spirit that stood in stark and damning contrast to the corrupt, post-political nihilism of the nation's ruling class. His story must be told first, for it is the standard of greatness against which the subsequent autopsy of elite failure and ideological rot must be measured. An emblem of true masculinity and duty. Survivors from that day remember the man in the red bandana not for his panic, but for his preternatural calm. His voice, steady and clear, cut through the shrieking chaos. He found the one passable stairwell and directed the terrified to safety. He organized impromptu firefighting efforts. He administered first aid to the wounded. He was seen carrying an injured woman on his back, descending from the 78th floor to the 61st, before depositing her with rescuers and turning around to go back up. He turned back into the collapsing edifice, into the very jaws of death, again and again. The last time he was seen alive, he was with a unit of FD9 firefighters, preparing to ascend once more into the hellscape to save more souls. He never came down. We now know that in the final hour of his life, this man in the red bandana saved at least 18 people. Crowther's actions represent the embodiment of a classical masculine virtue. A virtue that the culture of the 1990s had deemed toxic, primitive, and obsolete. He was the antithesis of the weak, self-obsessed, and cynical modern man that this culture had sought to create. In him, we see courage in the face of annihilation, responsibility for the helpless, sacrifice for the stranger, and the clear-headed judgment that is the hallmark of a sovereign soul. He is a ghost of a better America, a nation whose elites were, at that very moment, in the final stages of systematically dismantling the moral foundations that produce such men. He represents the America the cathedral despises and seeks to destroy. The contrast with the coming void. We must hold the image of Wells Crowther in our minds, for his heroism serves as a searing indictment of what America's leadership had become. On a day that saw the slaughter of nearly 3,000 innocents, fathers like Vincent Leto, who lived only to make others happy, veteran firefighters like Michael Fiore, who charged into the inferno as all others fled, and children who would wait for parents who would never come home. How did a nation that produces men like Wells Crowther become so vulnerable? The answer is not that America lacked good men. It is that America was ruled by a class of men and women who had lost the capacity to recognize, let alone fight, evil. They were infected with a spiritual plague, an ideological sickness that had rotted the nation's elite institutions from the inside out. Wells Crowther's final hour was a testament to the enduring strength of the American character. The collapse of the towers was a testament to the catastrophic failure of its mind. He was a martyr not only to the terror of Al-Qaeda, but to a cultural war waged by a domestic elite against the very virtues he embodied. The ideological disease that left America spiritually disarmed and physically vulnerable on the 11th of September, 2001, was incubated in the petri dish of the 1990s. The fall of the Soviet Union induced a state of delusional euphoria in the West, a belief that the great struggles of human existence had been permanently resolved. This was the decade of the holiday from history, a time when our elites, drunk on victory, declared peace in our time and turned their attention inward, not to strengthen the nation's foundations, but to dissolve them. The opium of Fukuyama, the great anesthetic. The high priest of this new delusion was the academic Francis Fukuyama, whose end of history thesis was not an analysis, but a potent spiritual narcotic. The theory, in essence, declared that Western liberal democracy and market capitalism represented the final, perfected form of human society. The great ideological battles were over. There would be no more grand struggles, no more existential threats. Humanity's work was done. All that was left was to manage the global economy and enjoy the fruits of consumerism. This seductive lie was eagerly consumed by a Western elite desperate for an excuse to abandon the hard work of vigilance. It was an intellectual tranquilizer, allowing an entire generation of leaders to believe they could sheathe the sword, put the watchmen to sleep, and indulge in a permanent vacation from the grim realities of the human condition. This created a profound vacuum of purpose and meaning at the heart of American life, and into that vacuum, a new kind of enemy, a domestic, ideological one rushed to fill the void. The war was not over. It had simply moved from an external struggle against a geopolitical foe to an internal one against America itself, the tyranny of political correctness. The domestic thought police, with the external enemy vanquished. The cathedral, that unholy alliance of academia, media, and the permanent bureaucracy, required a new one. It founded in the American people and their traditions. The 1990s witnessed the cancerous spread of political correctness, a phenomenon that had nothing to do with politeness and everything to do with ideological control. It was a Maoist-style system of public confession and ritual self-censorship, enforced by the high priests of the new woke religion. A complex and ever-shifting set of linguistic and intellectual taboos was established. To use the wrong word, to tell the wrong joke, to even think the wrong thought, was to risk being branded a heretic, a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, and to be excommunicated from polite society, stripped of your livelihood, and cast into the outer darkness. This was not hyperbole. It was policy. At the University of Wisconsin, after a fraternity held a satirical slave auction event, the administration instituted a speech code banning any student expression that could be perceived as demeaning to another's race or gender. Even an off-color joke could lead to official punishment. This academic tyranny became so egregious that a federal court was forced to intervene, striking down the code as an unconstitutional form of government thought control. While the nation's intellectual class was obsessively hunting for thought, criminals on campus, the real barbarians were learning to fly airplanes in Florida and Arizona, plotting an act of mass murder that would expose the fatal absurdity of this domestic witch hunt. The nation's attention had been deliberately turned inward, focused on imaginary threats, while the real and gathering danger on the horizon was ignored. The cult of multiculturalism, a doctrine of civilizational suicide, running parallel to the rise of PC culture, was the perversion of multiculturalism. What began as a noble and quintessentially American ideal, the respect for different cultures within a unified national fabric, was twisted into a weapon for the deconstruction of that very fabric. The traditional metaphor of the melting pot, which envisioned immigrants assimilating into a shared American identity, was declared to be an act of cultural oppression. It was replaced by the model of the salad ball, a balkanized collection of competing racial and ethnic tribes, each encouraged to nurse its historical grievances and emphasize its separateness. This new doctrine fostered a culture of civilizational self-loathing among the elite. Any attempt to define or defend a core American culture was smeared as nativist, jingoistic, or racist. A nation that becomes ashamed of itself, that teaches its children that its history is an unbroken story of villainy and oppression, cannot long survive. It loses the moral authority and the spiritual will to defend itself from those who wish it harm. This was a form of spiritual self-disarmament. The elites of the 1990s completed a bizarre inversion of priorities. They securitized the feelings of individuals and identity groups, creating safe spaces to protect fragile egos from hurtful words, while simultaneously desecuritizing the nation itself, dismissing genuine external threats as less important than the internal war against problematic thoughts. This intellectual and spiritual confusion was the deepest root of the disaster to come. The end of history created the vacuum. Political correctness provided the tools for internal purges, and multiculturalism provided the justification by teaching that the nation was unworthy of defense in the first place. It was a perfect closed-loop system for engineering national suicide.